I'm back with an assortment of allegedly true stories of weirdness, wonder, and of course, terror. From bunny monsters being chased by college students, to a shadow person getting absolutely dabbed on by some friends along for a nighttime drive. These stories are sure to be a curious one. Enjoy, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear some scary tales from China, modern dinosaur sightings, and camping stories. Remember, you can catch all my podcasts at eeriecast.com. Now, let's begin. A Walk Back Home from Pei West. I've always heard of stories of people being stalked and followed on their way home, and I always found those stories a bit unsettling. A stranger following you, watching you, and eventually finding out where you live. You can never be at peace in such situations, not knowing what intentions might be the motives of their behavior. However, I was always drawn back by the fact that no matter who they are, what their condition is, being crazy, a thief, or even a murderer, they're still human, and I could defend myself. I was extra confident. I'm a tall guy who does kickboxing, so I know how to handle myself pretty well in those situations. At least I thought I did. That was until 7 months ago on a Friday. I was out with some friends to celebrate our reunion with one of our friends who had temporarily come back from another city, where he still studies university to this day. We laughed, ate food, and reflected on many good memories we had together. Needless to say, we had so much fun that we lost track of time and stayed out late into the night. I usually don't stay out too late. I knew my family would be concerned, especially when they couldn't contact me, as my phone had died not long after we met up. So I said my goodbyes and went on my way home. I remembered taking a look at the clock on the wall before I left. It read 1:26 a.m. It was super late, and it would take me at least an hour and a half to walk home from the main road. So I decided to take a short route that went through a relatively small forest in the middle of my region, which would shorten my walk by half an hour, or even 45 minutes if I kept pace. This forest was used as an area for biking, jogging, picnics, and occasionally dirt biking. I'd walked through that forest many times before, so I knew my way through it. I gotta say, the walk was very relaxing. No shouting, no cars, no noise. It was like a vacation for my ears and mind. When I got to the entrance of the forest, I saw a guy jogging out of the trees. When he came closer, he had this look of confusion mixed with fear on his face. He just jogged right past me, without even acknowledging my presence. It immediately struck me as bizarre. What's his deal? Why is he jogging so late? I wondered. However, those were unnecessary thoughts, so I just brushed them off. I didn't let that mess up my calmed state of mind and kept on walking. As I went on, I felt a drastic change in the environment. It was unnaturally quiet. However, I could hear the sounds of crickets and owls here and there. This forest was not big enough and too close to residents for animals like deer or any other large wildlife to live in. As I walked further, it began to become more and more chilly. I found that weird since we were still in summer, and I couldn't feel any gust of wind on my skin. I didn't give it much mind and went on. About 5 minutes into the forest, my peace was disturbed by a loud, distant sound which sounded like someone was hitting one of the trees with a metal bar. This time, I was truly on alert. What would someone be doing out here so late? I wondered. Then I remembered the guy I saw earlier. Could it be that he heard the same noise and got scared? I thought. I started walking faster to avoid getting the attention of whoever was out there. I walked until the sound became nothing more than distant knocks. Nothing else happened for a while. As I was beginning to forget what had happened, a slight movement, about 50 to 60 meters to my right, caught my eye. I quickly ducked behind a tree and peeked to see what it was that was making those movements. There in the distance, I saw what appeared to be a silhouette walking slowly through the trees. The figure was unnaturally calm and stable. The last thing I needed was any unwanted attention, so I waited for them to pass. As it was walking, it was making a wheezing sound, as if it was struggling to breathe. I was focused on it, watching its every move. Then, at some point, it walked into the moonlight that was coming in through the trees, and it stopped, dead in its tracks. Now I could see what it looked like. It was fat with bulges on different parts of its body. The skin seemed like it had gone through a good blanching. It was extremely pale. I didn't know what I was seeing. Humans can be super weird sometimes, right? After a while, it began walking again and moved out of the moonlight. It took a couple of steps and walked into another moonlit area and stopped again. I whispered to myself, "What now? Why did you stop again?" Just as I whispered those words, whatever it was, snapped its head to my direction as if I had shouted the words. I didn't continue watching for long, since I immediately ducked my head to avoid being detected. But I saw enough to know that this wasn't normal. It didn't have a face, just a dark hole in its head. After a little bit, I slowly peeked back up, and to my horror, that thing wasn't there anymore. Now all my senses were on alert. My consciousness and primal instincts were screaming for me to get the heck out of there, and I tell you, they didn't need to tell me twice. I stood up, ready to run like my life depended on it. Before I could do so, I was met by a blinding darkness all around. I had been so focused on whatever that thing had been, I hadn't noticed my surroundings change. There was no moonlight anymore. Luckily, I knew the direction, but I was afraid to just run on blindly. What if I ran into that thing while running? Or what if I run into a tree or something and hurt myself? My mind was racing, my lungs gasping for air. I couldn't make sense of the situation and what I saw. After a while of thinking, I gathered my courage and began to walk slowly. On my way, I noticed that there were no more sounds. It was like I was walking in a dark and empty void. I could hear nothing except my own footsteps on the forest floor. I stopped for a moment, searching for any source of sound, anything that would tell me I'm still in the real world. I swear it was so quiet. If someone had thrown a needle, I could have heard it hit the ground. Am I going insane? I thought to myself. I was beginning to question whether or not I would even see my family again. I talked myself back to reality, and I pushed those thoughts away, as negative thoughts were the last thing I needed in that situation. I started to walk again. I walked for what felt like an eternity, trying my best to keep my mind stable, when the silence was finally broken. I stopped and listened. There, the faint sound of cars driving by. I can hear the road, I joyously said to myself. Before I could enjoy that milestone, somewhere behind me the sound of footsteps and wheezing began to emerge. I didn't think twice. I immediately began running in the direction of the road, when the footsteps behind me stopped. But I didn't dare do the same, I just kept going. As I was getting closer and closer to the exit, I slowed down for a bit to catch my breath, and to not die of a heart attack. It was but a moment later when another sound emerged. This time it was on my left. Once again the wheezing sound filled the air. A very uneasy feeling came over me. I felt shivers going down my spine. Then, when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a terrible scream came from that direction. The only way I can describe the scream is if you pull the nails out of a man's fingers and they scream out in agony. But take that scream and make it 10 times louder than what a normal human could produce. It hurt my ears. That was it for me. I started running again, barely missing the trees along my way. My body was pumped with so much adrenaline, I felt as if I could run until morning without stopping. As I kept avoiding the trees, I was finally able to see the first bit of light from the road. But I had no time to rejoice, because I was afraid that if I stopped for even a second, it would be the last decision that I would make and regret. I managed to run out of the trees, never stopping until I was certain I was on the other side of the road. I nearly got hit by a car, but I didn't care. Once on the other side, my body decided to remember how much energy it had just used, and I felt a sense of dizziness overcome me. I sat down on the ground to rest for a bit, catching my breath. I was scanning the forest for anything unusual, but everything seemed normal. No darkness and no one in sight. Seems like I am going insane after all, I thought to myself, laughing a bit. But in my heart, I was still concerned that what I saw was real. I didn't want to believe it. I made it home, and as expected, my family were up and waiting for me, concerned. When they saw me, my dad was extremely angry, and my mom started questioning where I was. I told them that my phone died and I got lost in the woods. I wasn't about to tell them what happened exactly, because I was struggling to believe it myself. Everyone was just relieved I made it back. I said goodnight and I went upstairs to my room. I was exhausted from the long day, especially from what happened in the forest, which I told myself I was just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me, although I knew that tricks of the mind wouldn't be so real and vivid. My energy completely drained, physically and mentally, it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. Now, usually I open my window when I go to bed. But in the middle of the night I felt cold, so I got up to shut the window and I went back to bed. Before I could drift off back to sleep again, something caught my attention. A familiar noise. That wheezing sound. But how? I got up into a sitting position and listened. I could hear the wheezing, but it was faint, and I was certain where it was coming from. I kept listening as the sound was slowly getting louder and closer. Then, a very disturbing reality hit me. The sound was coming from inside our house. I didn't know what to do. I just froze and listened. First, it was only the wheezing sound. Then I could slowly make out light and steady footsteps. I heard the bottom stair creak. My heart sank as I knew that it was coming up the stairs. I quickly laid back down facing the wall, my back facing the door. I lay in terror as I heard the footsteps coming closer and closer to my room. I began praying that my family would be safe, although none of them ever woke up or seemed to have noticed the noise. That was a good thing, I guess. The sound got louder and louder until I could hear it just outside my bedroom door. It stood outside my room for a few minutes. I had my head under the blanket pretending to be asleep. I wished so badly that someone would have just hit me in the back of the head, knocking me out until morning, so that I wouldn't have to witness such terrible sense of terror. After a short while, I started hearing faint scratching on the door. I started to pray again, and whoever was on the other side stopped scratching. I listened, and to my horror, it began to yank the door handle up and down until it was open. The wheezing was ever louder now. My mind went blank. I couldn't think. I was waiting for a terrible fate to be set upon me. I was sweating, cold sweat out of fear. My mind fought away any ideas, no fight, no flight. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I didn't know how to react. I lay there like a sheep waiting for its slaughter. The thing behind me stopped wheezing, as if it wanted to utter a word to me, but wasn't able to properly. Instead, it came out terrifying and unusual. That was the most scared I've been in my entire life. After that sound, the wheezing came back, and suddenly, I felt the side of my bed get heavy, as if someone had sat on it. My heart was beating out of my chest then. I felt dizzy out of sheer terror. I just knew it was looking directly at me, but I just kept pretending to be asleep. It made the sound once again, but failed to utter anything that made sense. It got up and sat down again. I think it somehow knew I wasn't actually sleeping, and it was trying to get a reaction out of me, for God knows what. Despite all that, I managed to hold up, and I didn't move. The wheezing started to get louder again, more violent, as if it was starting to get angry. Then it got up from my bed and stood there for an eternity. Then I felt something grab a hold of my blanket close to my feet. With a tremendous amount of force, the blanket was torn away from me. I was now almost crying, my mind reeling, basically screaming at me to get up and run, but my body wouldn't dare move an inch. I continued hearing the wheezing for about 5 more minutes. I noticed the room was freezing now, perhaps because I didn't have my blanket. After a short while, the wheezing started to become normal again, and finally I heard footsteps slowly going out of my room, and the wheezing stopped. However, I never heard it go down the stairs. It was definitely trying to make me believe it was gone, but I didn't dare move. Then it finally gave up and started going down the stairs. I fell asleep without the blanket. I didn't want to get up or even move at all. The following morning, I woke up to my mom and dad talking downstairs. They were looking all over the house. Apparently, the front door was wide open, and they were looking to see if anything had been stolen. They asked me if I had heard anything last night. I said no, but in my mind I knew better. I knew that what I heard and saw in the forest was in my room and even sat on the side of my bed, just watching me. I simply didn't know how to explain it to them. It's been a couple of months now, and I've not had any unusual encounters with it. However, every now and then, late at night, I hear the same scream that I heard in the forest from a distance. I'm not sure, but I think it's making sure that I never forget that it's there, or that it might come back one day. Doors don't seem to stop it. That experience gave a new meaning to the idea of home sweet home, because I wasn't sure if I was safe there anymore. A strange encounter on a winter night. From Pink Toaster. I live in southern Ontario, Canada, in a smallish historical Niagara region town that no one ever seems to recognize when I mention its name. It was a calm, cold winter night in January 2018 when it happened. At the time, I lived in an apartment building across a parking lot from the building my mother and sister lived in, so I was able to just walk right over and visit often. One night I went on a grocery run. One tiring trip downhill to the store and back up with a cartload of groceries later, I was casually walking down the street towards home, when suddenly, something darted out in front of me. It ran out from behind someone's car in their driveway, around a hedge, and seemingly disappeared. I was shocked, to say the least. I stopped in my tracks when I saw it. A moment later, I rushed over to the other side of the hedge, only to find no trace of the thing. It's hard to describe this creature without being able to draw it for you, but what I saw feels like it defies logic. It was silhouetted in the darkness, but I could make out a body kind of like a kiwi bird, a parrot-like beak, skinny lizard legs with knees bent slightly and facing outwards. And, weirdest of all, what seemed to be rabbit ears laid back against its head and short neck. It moved so fast, too, as within little more than a single second it had run out, turned, and gone behind the hedge. It didn't even make any sound, not even the crunching of snow beneath its feet, which barely even made a dent in the snow. A bit freaked out, I stopped at my mom's place to tell her, my sister, and my mom's visiting boyfriend about what I'd seen. They were all as unable to come up with an adequate explanation as I was, aside from suggesting that maybe I'd seen an odd bird. Here's where it gets even stranger, though. As I left the building and was seen off and wished well by the others, we saw some guys quickly exit my building, behaving in a borderline panicked manner. They must have been some of the Mexican college students that lived there, because as we stopped and listened, we heard them loudly speaking to each other in Spanish. Another young man ran over to them. In English, one of them spoke. "Did you find it?" Another shouted, "Where'd it go?" It made us wonder, were these two things connected? Were they looking for whatever I'd seen, and it was perhaps some escaped illegal pet of theirs? I'm sure there's some logical explanation for what I saw, but if there is, I sure as heck can't think of one. I wasn't super tired at the time, nor am I prone to hallucinations. The mystery of what that creature was has baffled me, on and off, ever since. It didn't scare me, but it certainly did startle me, and it has left me confused, not helped by the way those students from my building were acting, and what they were saying not long after. I know so much about animals, even knowing of many obscure ones few others think of, and yet I can't for the life of me place what this could have been. Can anyone tell me what animal looks and moves like that, the way I described? I welcome any theories at this point. Shadow on Highway 33, from Alice May 18. My town has no shortages of ghost stories and urban legends, but for privacy reasons, I'll stick to things that are more relevant to my experience. If I even mentioned any of the three of our most famous hauntings or urban legends, a quick Google search would pinpoint my general area. So, not too far from my hometown in Southern California, there's a highway that trails from just north of Los Angeles to just south of San Francisco called Highway 33. This highway is known for its winding roads through the mountains, as well as many urban legends and supposedly haunted places. Perhaps the scariest thing about it is the fact that people have been known to occasionally die on the road, due to either reckless driving or other reasons. It was the night before Halloween a few years back when 3 friends and I decided that we wanted to go up to an old and relatively secluded graveyard up in the mountains, because that's just what early to mid-20-somethings do when they're bored. One of our friends in the car had been there quite a few times in the past. The place was smaller and older, with graves dating back to the early 1800s. The best part was, since it was next to a neighborhood, so long as people respected the area, it was open 24/7. No trespassing required. Upon hearing about this from one of our friends, we decided it was the perfect time to visit it. So the 4 of us hopped into the car after dinner and headed out. My best friend was the one driving, with me in the passenger seat and 2 of our friends in the back. By this point, it was beginning to get late, maybe around 9:30 or 10. We talked and drove up the winding road. We were soon outside the small town in the mountains. There were no streetlights amongst the wooded area we were in, and due to being not terribly far from the ocean, the fog had rolled inland even further than usual, so we weren't able to see the stars nor the moon that night. I don't remember much of the conversation the 4 of us were having, but I had turned around at a certain point to face the front, and I felt like time had slowed down for me the moment I saw this dark figure ahead of us. It stood between two large trees right next to the road. At this section of the small back road, houses were fairly scarce, maybe half a mile apart, if not further. I thought at first that it had been a person wanting to cross the highway for whatever reason, or perhaps it was my imagination. But as we rounded the inside of the mountain, I saw it step out from the trees. It was dark, even darker than the shadows of the forest somehow. It made me tense up. I saw what appeared to be a humanoid shape, taking a step, 2 steps, into the road, directly in the pathway of our car. What I saw was a shadow-like person that had to be close to about 6 or 7 feet tall, taking long strides. As our headlight shined through it, it was like an ombre of shadow from light, from its legs where our headlight shined through the shadow, to more of the darker shadows of its head and upper torso, where the light didn't directly hit it. My eyes saw a dark moving semi-solid shadow person, but in that split moment, my brain registered it as a person, and I screamed my best friend's name, pushing back against my seat, my foot slamming against the floor as if trying to will the car to brake, in pure panic that she was going to hit someone, that she was going to hit this person. But as the shadow man hit the front of the car, he completely vanished. My best friend yelled, demanding to know what my problem was. I had startled her so much, especially on such a sharp turn. For a moment, the other friends in the back were quiet, no longer chittering around. And as my mind finally realized what I'd seen, I asked her in a panicked voice if she had seen something on the road. And she responded, "No, I didn't. What are you talking about?" Her voice was a bit more calm, but still shaken and irritated. So I told her what I saw. A shadow person that stepped out onto the road, one that I mistook for an actual person. "I didn't see anything," I remember her response, her voice even calmer than before. After that, the conversation slowly returned to the car again. I almost wish I could say that I saw it again that night, but once we finally arrived at the graveyard, we saw a few flashlights lighting through the trees inside the gated-off area, and my best friend said that she had a weird feeling about going that night. So we quickly turned around and left, driving back home. I'm religious, and I do believe in the supernatural to some extent, but I always look for the most rational or scientific way to explain something before I even consider the paranormal. But honestly, I have no explanation for it. I've never had any mental problems or anything like visual hallucinations before that night, and I've never had any underlying mental health issues that would cause me to somehow see something like that. Heck, I have never even done drugs before, and only on very rare occasions have I had something like a sip of alcohol. It had been over a year since I had alcohol at that point in time. I know it seems unimpressively made up and all you have is my word on it, but I promise you that what happened, what I saw, was 100% real. If anyone has had anything like this happen to them, or if you have an explanation, I'd be glad to hear it. Thanks for listening. From the Darkness at Sea, from Chan Chan. I'm an avid believer in the paranormal, and I've had numerous experiences, but the one I will recount this time comes from a night back in the summer of 2018, when I decided to go on a late-night trip to Rockaway Beach with a friend named Jay. There's just something magical about having the beach to yourself, with no throngs of humans around. You can enjoy the majesty of the sea under a soft blanket of meditative darkness. It must have been at least after 10 p.m. when Jay and I got there and found parking. There were very few people around on the boardwalk as we walked to a part where we could get onto the actual beach. It's sectioned off at many parts. We found a ramp-like walkway leading down to the water, and as we took our shoes off, our feet were greeted by the cool caress of the sand. We made sure we were secluded but not too far from the path leading back, before laying out a blanket I'd brought with me. We sat near the water's edge, where we could listen to the song of the sea as the waves rolled in and out, crashing on the shore, and I got to talking about life. We sat there for quite some time, just talking and staring off to the horizon and sea. Though the two were nearly indistinguishable, they seemed to meld together into the maw of an abyss. At night, the sea had a deep darkness to it, like ink, whereas the sky had a slight hue of navy or dark purple. Either way, this night was dark. There was no moon, and it was cloudy. There also weren't any other lights around, as the boardwalk was dimly lit, and we were far enough away where the light didn't reach us. As we sat talking, our voices carried off into that void by the cool sea breeze, barely a whisper above the roar of the restless waves. I saw something peculiar on the horizon. It was an extremely bright orb of light. So bright, it looked as if it could have been a star in the ocean. I found it odd as it was so luminous and just appeared out of nowhere. I mentioned this to Jay, and he took note of it, but we continued to talk as I watched it. I was now focused on the only light out in the water. Slowly, this light crept towards the shore, moving slowly with the water. I don't recall seeing it bob or meander with the waves too much, but it moved steadily. I had my eyes on it the entire time, and when it got nearly halfway to the shore, it just vanished. For a while, the sea was just that endless blackness again, and I found it odd that something that bright just seemed to disappear abruptly beneath the waves, without showing any signs of sinking or dimming, as if it had been extinguished. When that happened, it made me wonder if I'd really seen anything at all. And if I had, what was it? Jay and I continued to sit at the shore, conversing, but my eyes never left the horizon. Not too long after, I saw the same light reappear, but it was much closer now, and instead of moving perpendicular to the shore, it seemed to have an agency of its own, and moved diagonally, almost parallel to the shore, not showing any signs of being affected by the tide at all. It seemed to be moving faster than before, too. It was very close to us now, maybe 20 to 30 feet out, before it dipped under the water again and vanished without a trace. It was then an unmistakable and insurmountable feeling of dread washed over the two of us. We weren't sure why we felt that way, but we couldn't shake the feeling at all. Thinking about it now makes me shudder. A feeling like that is not something you feel often, but when you do, it's like your senses are screaming at you to flee. Your pulse and respiration quicken, and you enter that instinctual and primordial place of fight or flight. However, despite that feeling, we stayed put to see what would play out, as we were both also curious. The next thing we knew, something silently rose out of the water off to our right. It seemingly didn't cause any additional ripples, aside from the naturally occurring ones from the tide. It stood maybe 10 to 15 feet tall. Jay and I had stopped talking at this point, as we both felt very uncomfortable. We seemed to both be holding our breaths to remain quiet. I couldn't make out very distinguished features, as I was afraid to even really look at the thing directly. But Jay and I both got this sense it was aware of us, and it knew we were aware of it as well. Jay didn't have his glasses on at the time, but from what he could discern, it was bipedal, tall, and looming. From what I could see, its whole body was this ghastly, sickly-looking yellow, and seemed to have a faint glow emanating from it, similar to the way light looks in fog. The closest thing I can liken its visage to was that of an old-fashioned deep-sea diver, but more spectral and not of this world. Do you want to stay? Jay asked me quietly after a few moments. No, let's go. I don't want to be like those people in horror movies, I said as I knew we were both freaked out. Every cell in our bodies were nudging us away. I hurriedly picked up my blanket and we grabbed our shoes, swiftly walking back, not running as that might have been perceived as a challenge or invitation for chase to that thing. It was a little distance down from us, and I'm glad we decided to sit somewhere that wasn't too far from the trail leading back up to the boardwalk. There was a young woman hanging out by a lifeguard chair near the ramp, and Jay asked me if I wanted to ask her if she could see it too. I nodded. Excuse me, I started as I tried to keep my voice even. We're sorry to bother you, but can you see anything down there? I pointed in the direction we came from. I don't remember seeing anything when I looked back and felt concerned about this. No. I don't see anything over there. Why? The girl replied as she looked to see if she could see anything worth seeing. Well, we thought we saw something weird just now, but it doesn't seem like it's there anymore. Well, have a good night. I looked back again to where we saw that thing only to see a deserted beach. Be careful and stay safe, Jay said to the girl as we walked past her and up the ramp. When we were back on the boardwalk, I chanced to look back to where we saw the entity again. And I don't know if it was a trick of the light, but I swear I saw the faint yellow glimmer akin to the phantom pallor of whatever it was we saw standing in the water near where we had been sitting. It almost seemed like it was both in this reality and not, faded in some parts of its body but faintly glowing in others. It almost seemed like it was gazing at the sand, dazed, but when I looked at it, it turned its head slightly in my direction, that glow becoming more solid. I quickly turned my head and didn't look back after that. Jay and I got to the safety of his car before we looked at each other in disbelief. Did you see that? I asked him, hesitantly. Yes, I can't make any sense of what we just saw. Me neither. Did you get that heavy feeling of dread before the thing showed up? Absolutely. And we're both sober. It's not like we both imagined the same thing and felt that same feeling out of nowhere. The feeling ripped through me and felt like a billion feather-light prods at my joints and nerves saying slowly, slowly, you need to move. We need to check the newspaper tomorrow to see if there's any kind of disappearance here. That would be crazy, I said, as I trailed off and we proceeded to discuss every moment of what just happened, but came to no conclusion. He drove away to take me back to my house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that that thing was still thinking of us, or even searching for us. I felt really scared even when I got to my house and back inside. Jay was still shaken too. I tried to do some research on my phone about this being, but could find nothing conclusive. If anyone can think of what it was, let me know. I never thought I'd see or experience anything like that where I live, but it just goes to show you, don't take anything for granted. This world we live in is much stranger than we may ever know. Additionally, never ignore your feelings, especially feelings of dread. Nothing good can come of it. Oh Heavens, from Overtone Warrior 96. This particular story is succinct, and I wanted to tell it to see if anyone else has witnessed what I have. This occurred 7 years ago, about an hour north of Houston, Texas, in a middle to upper-class neighborhood. It was smack dab in the middle of the suburbs, and only a 5-minute drive from my town. so this occurrence completely confused me. I went on a night walk with my cousin and a couple of our friends at the time. We simply went walking up and down the streets of our neighborhood and the connecting one. We didn't even branch off into any external forests or wilderness of any kind, just the well-lit streets. We walked for about 30 to 40 minutes when they wanted to return to the house to play video games or watch a movie. I can't remember which, and either way, it has no relevance to the main point of this story. I decided to stay out when they were walking back. It was a beautiful night after all, and I love looking at the expanse of the open sky. However, the thing I saw in the sky that night would forever keep my mind open to such strange and peculiar possibilities of this multiverse in which we live. I was seated on a huge decorative boulder. The designers of the neighborhood placed 5 or 6 of these beauties on a field of grass, which separated the main street from a cul-de-sac. As I sat Indian style on this thing, I placed the crystals in my pocket onto their larger sibling and began to meditate in the cool nocturnal breeze. I watched my friends disappear around the corner in the adjacent neighborhood, and 5 to 10 minutes later, it came flying or hovering by. At first, I didn't see it, I just heard it. Before anything came into view, I heard the most bizarre, unsettling, and yet stimulating noise. I couldn't fathom what it was I was hearing, nor would I ever hear anything else like it to this day. It sounded like a low and bassy hum, mixed with a piercing tone in the middle of the bass. It produced this noise like a binaural beat in the sense that it reverberated or pulsated, sort of like subtle dubstep wobbles. A different way to describe the piercing noise is a whistle mixed with the buzzing and zapping of an electrical current. Then, as the noise got progressively louder and more disturbing, it came hovering over the tops of the pine trees. It was a small, unknown vehicle, flying so low it almost brushed the tops of the pine trees. I still have never seen anything like it. It looked futuristic, and at that moment, without even putting words to it in my mind, I figured what I was looking at was some sort of alien craft. It didn't look like a drone, nor a flying saucer, but like something else. It was elongated like a drone, but had no discernible propellers. It seemed to just float all on its own. All the while, I'm rubbing my eyes to make sense of this strange thing. The noise just went on and on and on. I could tell there was a sound to its mechanisms of flight, but it seemed like it had speakers on it, playing additional noise. The thing I noticed about its pulsating sound is how it made me feel. As I sat and watched, the combination of looking at its odd appearance and frightening sounds made me feel very out of place. I suddenly felt this flash of energy within me that felt as if it opened my mind and body to a vast and unlimited expanse, if that makes any sense. I wasn't contemplating any additional ideas, I was just observing it and the weird psychedelic stimulation it seemed to give me. Eventually, though, it went far enough away to where the sound went faint. I didn't even think about how long I sat there and watched it go by, but it ended up being around 10 to 15 minutes to be far enough away to where it was out of range. Was I the only one who saw this thing? I looked around where I was and I was alone, but some other people must have seen it on its path far away from me. I know what some people are thinking, that it was a drone and nothing more. This was not a drone. This was something from beyond our scope of consciousness. After that night, I tried to tell people what I'd seen, but most tried to debunk it, or they didn't really care. The cognitive dissonance it gave me that night has given me the knowledge that we're not alone, and we haven't been for a long time. There are things in this cosmos that are stranger than fiction. Just because we've never seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We're sitting ducks in this galaxy, and anyone could be watching us from beyond the scope of our singular planet. I don't even care to proselytize. I just figured sharing my story might possibly be important. Toward the end of writing this, a normal helicopter has already flown 2 slow loops around my house, and I swear I saw a flash of light outside my window. It wasn't a car because of the way my window was positioned. It might have been something normal, sure, like a neighbor's flashlight, but I've never seen a flash of light out there before. I swear I'm being serious. I wish that hadn't happened while writing this. The implications in my mind are too frightening. Think of me however you want, but trust me when I say that I'm not seeking adoration and to leave people awestruck. I just wish I had more security and safety in my life. Is there any certainty in the cosmos?